The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Officer James Mitchell adjusted his iconic red uniform and checked his rifle one final time. At 28 years old, he had served as a Queen's Guard for 6 years, standing motionless for hours while thousands of tourists snapped photos and tried their best to make him break character. Today felt like any other day in his carefully structured military life. James had always taken immense pride in his role. Growing up in a working-class family in Manchester, he never imagined he would one day protect the royal family. His father worked in a factory, his mother cleaned offices at night, and they sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they never had. When he earned his position as a Queen's Guard, it felt like he had reached the pinnacle of honor and duty. The routine was always the same. Stand perfectly still, eyes forward, weapon at the ready. Ignore the tourists who would wave frantically, make silly faces, or try to provoke a reaction. He had mastered the art of becoming a living statue, his mind trained to focus on his duty while his body remained absolutely motionless. Nothing could break his concentration or make him abandon his post. But as James took his position outside the palace gates that Tuesday morning, he had no idea that his entire understanding of duty was about to be challenged by a small boy who couldn't speak. The crowds were already gathering, cameras clicking away, tour guides explaining the traditions of the Royal Guard to fascinated visitors from around the world. Among the sea of faces pressed against the palace railings, 8-year-old Tommy Harrison stood quietly beside his grandmother, Sarah. Unlike the other children who were pointing excitedly and trying to get the guards' attention, Tommy simply watched with wide, curious eyes. He had been born deaf and his world was one of silence, but his grandmother had promised him something special. During their London visit, Sarah Harrison had saved for 2 years to bring her grandson to see the Queen's Guard. Tommy's parents had died in a car accident when he was 5, and she had raised him alone ever since. She knew how fascinated he was by soldiers and uniforms, spending hours looking at picture books about brave men and women who protected others. This trip was supposed to be the highlight of his young life. Tommy pressed his small hands against the cold iron railings and studied James intently. While other children shouted and waved, Tommy communicated through hand gestures, his nimble fingers dancing in the air as he signed to his grandmother. She smiled and nodded, but her heart ached knowing that her grandson lived in a world where so few people understood his silent language. The boy's eyes never left James, and something about his intense, respectful gaze was different from the usual tourist attention. Tommy wasn't trying to make the guard break character or laugh. Instead, he seemed to genuinely admire the soldiers' discipline and dedication. His small face showed nothing but pure respect and wonder. As the morning progressed, more tourists came and went, but Tommy remained at the railing with his grandmother. He had brought a small notebook and was carefully sketching the guard, trying to capture every detail of the magnificent red uniform and the serious expression on James's face. His grandmother watched lovingly as Tommy's artistic talents shone through his simple drawings. Sarah noticed that her grandson seemed unusually excited about something. His hands moved rapidly in sign language and his eyes sparkled with an idea that she couldn't quite understand yet. Tommy had always been a thoughtful child, wise beyond his years due to the challenges he had faced. But today there was something special brewing in his young mind. The clock tower chimed 11 o'clock, and James prepared for another hour of standing guard. He had noticed the quiet boy at the railing but hadn't thought much of it initially. However, as time passed, he became aware that this child was different. There was something about the boy's stillness and respectful observation that stood out among the chaos of tourist activity. Little did James know that Tommy was carefully planning something that would soon change both of their lives forever. The boy had recognized something in the soldier that reminded him of the heroes in his picture books, and he was determined to show his appreciation in the only way he knew how. His small hands were already preparing for a gesture that would bridge the gap between his silent world and the guard's disciplined duty. Tommy tugged gently on his grandmother's coat sleeve and began signing rapidly, his small hands moving with urgency and excitement. Sarah leaned down to better understand what her grandson was trying to communicate. Through his gestures, she realized that Tommy wanted to do something special for the guard, something that would show his respect and admiration. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sarah whispered, though she knew Tommy couldn't hear her voice. She had learned sign language when Tommy came to live with her, determined to communicate with him in his own language. Watching his animated expressions, she could see he had something important on his mind. Tommy pointed to his heart, then to James, and then made a gesture that Sarah recognized as thank you. But there was more to it than simple gratitude. The boy's eyes were filled with tears, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. He had never seen someone stand so still and strong, protecting others with such dedication. In his young mind, James represented everything heroic and good about the world. The grandmother's heart melted as she understood what Tommy wanted to do. He wanted to salute the guard, to show his respect in the universal language of honor that transcended the barrier of his deafness. But Tommy's salute wouldn't be ordinary. It would be perfect, practiced, and filled with genuine admiration for the soldiers' service. For weeks before their trip, Tommy had been practicing military salutes after seeing them in his picture books. He would stand in front of his bedroom mirror, straightening his small shoulders and raising his right hand with precision. His grandmother had watched him practice, not understanding why until this very moment when she saw the deep respect in his eyes as he looked at James. Meanwhile, James continued his stoic vigil, trained to ignore all distractions and maintain his professional composure. He had been tested many times by tourists who tried everything imaginable to get a reaction. People had danced, sung, made faces, and even pretended to faint in front of him. Nothing had ever made him break protocol or abandon his position. But something about the quiet boy at the railing was beginning to penetrate his professional armor. In his peripheral vision, James could see that the child hadn't moved away like most tourists do after taking their photos. Instead, the boy remained there with unwavering attention, showing a level of respect that was rare among the crowds. Tommy stepped closer to the railing, his small hands gripping the iron bars. His grandmother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, understanding that this moment was deeply important to her grandson. She had seen him practice his salute countless times, but now she realized it had all been leading to this moment, his chance to honor a real soldier. The boy's breathing quickened with nervous excitement. He had never done anything like this before, never tried to communicate with someone who couldn't understand sign language, but somehow he felt certain that his gesture would be understood. There was something about the guard's presence that made Tommy feel safe and inspired. Other tourists began to notice the intensity of the moment. A few people stopped taking photos and started watching the small boy who seemed so focused on the motionless guard. There was something magnetic about Tommy's quiet determination that drew attention without him even realizing it. Sarah squeezed her grandson's shoulder encouragingly. She could see the courage building in his young heart. The same courage that had helped him overcome so many challenges in his short life. This boy who had lost his parents, who lived in a silent world, who faced daily struggles that most children never experience, was about to do something beautiful and brave. Tommy took a deep breath and stepped back from the railing slightly, giving himself enough space for what he was about to do. His grandmother's eyes filled with tears as she recognized the determination on his face, the same expression he had worn when he first learned to write his name, when he mastered riding his bicycle, when he faced each new challenge that life presented to him. The moment was approaching when Tommy's silent world would meet James's disciplined duty, and neither of them could predict how profoundly it would affect them both. The boy raised his small chin with dignity, his eyes never leaving the guard's face, preparing to bridge the gap between their different worlds with a gesture of pure respect and admiration. Around them, the bustling activity of tourists and traffic continued, but in that small space between the railing and the guard post, time seemed to slow down as Tommy prepared to make his move. With careful precision that would have made any drill sergeant proud, Tommy straightened his small shoulders and brought his right hand up in a perfect military salute. His movements were slow and deliberate, filled with the kind of respect that can only come from genuine admiration. His eyes remained locked on James's face, hoping desperately that his gesture would be seen and understood. James felt something shift in his awareness, though his training kept his body perfectly still. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the small figure at the railing, and something about the boy's posture commanded his attention in a way that no tourist ever had before. There was a gravity to the moment that made his heart skip a beat, though his expression remained unchanged. The salute was flawless. Tommy held it steady, his small arm trembling slightly from the effort but never wavering. His face showed intense concentration and deep respect, the kind of emotion that adults sometimes lose but children express with pure honesty. The boy's eyes glistened with unshed tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of finally being able to show his hero how much he meant to him. Other tourists began to notice what was happening. Cameras that had been clicking constantly suddenly fell silent as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A hush fell over the immediate area as adults and children alike recognized the profound sincerity of the small boy's gesture. Even those who didn't understand the full significance could feel the power of the moment. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she watched her grandson's beautiful tribute. She had raised this brave little boy through the darkest period of his life, watched him struggle with loss and disability, seen him find strength in his silent world, but nothing had prepared her for the dignity and courage he was displaying at this moment. Her heart swelled with pride and love for the child who continued to amaze her every day. Tommy's arm began to ache from holding the salute, but he refused to lower it. In his mind, this wasn't just a gesture. It was his way of saying everything he couldn't speak aloud. Thank you for protecting people. Thank you for standing strong. Thank you for being a hero. His young heart poured all of these feelings into that one perfect salute. James felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. In 6 years of guard duty, he had never encountered anything like this. The boy's salute wasn't a joke or a tourist stunt. It was real respect from someone who truly understood the meaning of service. The sincerity in the child's eyes was so powerful that James felt his own emotions rising to the surface. The crowd around the railing had grown completely silent. Even the most chattering tourists seemed to sense that something sacred was happening. Parents lifted their own children to see better, and many adults found themselves deeply moved by the simple yet profound interaction between the small boy and the stoic. Guard Tommy's grandmother watched through tears as her grandson maintained his salute with unwavering determination. She could see the physical strain on his small body, but also the spiritual strength that kept him steady. This was the same boy who had learned to communicate through hand gestures when the world couldn't hear his voice, who had found ways to express his joy and sorrow without sound, who had taught her that words weren't always necessary to convey the deepest emotions. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours to everyone watching. Tommy's salute remained perfect, his respect absolute. He had committed to this gesture completely, and nothing would make him give up until he felt it had been properly received. His small body trembled with the effort, but his spirit remained strong and focused. James felt something he had never experienced during his guard duty, a profound connection with another human being that transcended words, rules, and protocol. The boy's silent communication was more powerful than any speech he had ever heard. Here was someone who understood the true meaning of honor and service, someone who appreciated the sacrifice and dedication that his role represented. The emotional weight of the moment was building to a crescendo. Tommy's perfect salute continued, his eyes never leaving James's face, hoping for some sign that his message had been received. The guard's training battled against his human heart, creating an internal conflict that would soon demand resolution. Neither of them knew that this silent exchange was about to shatter every rule and protocol that governed James's professional life, leading to a moment that would change both of them forever. The internal battle raging inside James reached its breaking point. 6 years of rigid training told him to remain motionless, to ignore all distractions, to maintain his post no matter what happened around him. But his heart was screaming something entirely different. This wasn't a distraction. This was a moment of pure human connection that demanded acknowledgement and respect. Tommy's small arm continued to tremble with the effort of maintaining his salute, but his determination never wavered. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his grandmother could see the physical strain, yet the boy's eyes remained bright with hope and respect. He had put everything into this gesture, and he would hold it until his strength gave out completely if necessary. The crowd had grown larger, with people stopping their tours and conversations to witness what was unfolding. Many pulled out their phones, but something about the solemnity of the moment made them hesitate to intrude. This wasn't entertainment. It was something sacred and beautiful that deserved reverence rather than casual recording. James felt his breathing change as emotion overwhelmed his professional training. The boy's salute wasn't just a gesture anymore. It had become a bridge between two souls, one who served in silence and strength, and another who lived in silence but spoke through courage. The guard realized that acknowledging this brave child's respect wasn't breaking protocol. It was honoring the very values that protocol was meant to protect. Sarah watched her grandson with a mixture of pride and concern. She could see Tommy's strength beginning to fade, his small body shaking with effort, but she also recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same expression he wore when he refused to give up on learning something new, when he pushed through frustration and disability to achieve his goals. This salute meant everything to him. Suddenly, James made a decision that would go against everything he had been taught about remaining motionless. The boy's respect and courage deserved to be honored, and no rulebook could contain the human response that this moment demanded. His heart won the battle against his training, and he knew there was only one right thing to do. With movement so subtle that only those watching closely could see it, James shifted his eyes to meet Tommy's gaze directly. For the first time in 6 years of guard duty, he deliberately made eye contact with a member of the public. The connection was immediate and electric, two pairs of eyes meeting across the gap between duty and admiration, silence and respect. Tommy's face lit up with joy when he realized the guard was looking directly at him. His salute somehow became even more perfect, his small body straightening with renewed strength. The acknowledgement he had hoped for was happening, and it filled him with warmth and happiness that radiated from his entire being. But James wasn't finished. The boy's courage and respect demanded more than just eye contact. In a movement that shocked everyone watching, including himself, James slowly and deliberately returned Tommy's salute. His rifle remained in position, but his free hand rose in a precise military acknowledgement of the brave little boy's gesture. The crowd gasped audibly. People who had seen hundreds of royal guards over the years knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. Guards simply didn't break character, didn't interact with tourists, and certainly didn't return salutes from children. Yet here was this soldier, acknowledging a small boy's respect with his own gesture of honor. Tommy's eyes filled with tears of pure joy. His hero had seen him, had acknowledged his respect, had returned his salute with equal dignity. For a moment, his silent world felt completely connected to the bigger world around him. The language barrier, the hearing barrier, all the things that sometimes made him feel different or isolated, none of it mattered in this perfect moment of understanding. Sarah wiped tears from her own eyes as she watched her grandson's dreams come true. The guard's response to Tommy's salute was more than she had ever hoped for. She had brought Tommy to London to see something special, but she never imagined they would experience something this magical and meaningful. The salute between James and Tommy lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal to everyone watching. Two people from completely different worlds had found a way to communicate respect, admiration, and human connection without speaking a single word. It was a reminder that some of the most powerful communications happen in silence, through gestures of the heart rather than words from the mouth. But the moment was far from over. What happened next would take everyone by surprise and create a memory that would last a lifetime. James lowered his salute, but something extraordinary was happening inside him. The brief connection with Tommy had awakened emotions he had kept buried under years of military discipline. Looking into the boy's grateful, tear-filled eyes, he saw something that reminded him why he had chosen to serve in the first place: to protect innocence, to stand for what was right, to be someone that good people could look up to and trust. Tommy finally lowered his own salute, his small arm shaking from the effort, but his face glowing with happiness. He pressed both hands against the railing and continued to watch James with pure admiration. The boy's grandmother had explained to him before their visit that the guards weren't allowed to talk or move, so receiving a returned salute felt like the greatest gift imaginable. The crowd around them buzzed with quiet excitement, people whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. Many were reaching for their phones to capture the moment, but something about the guard's demeanor suggested that the interaction wasn't over yet. James seemed to be wrestling with an internal decision that was growing stronger by the second. Sarah noticed that Tommy was trying to sign something to her, his hands moving in gestures she recognized. He was asking if he could give the guard something, a small drawing he had made in his notebook. It was a picture of a soldier standing tall and proud with the words, "Thank you, hero," written carefully in Tommy's neat handwriting. The grandmother's heart melted at her grandson's desire to give even more. James watched the boy's animated conversation with his grandmother and realized that this child was deaf. The recognition hit him like a thunderbolt. This brave little boy lived in a silent world, just as James stood in disciplined silence at his post. They shared the experience of silence, but for completely different reasons. The connection felt even deeper and more meaningful now. The weight of Tommy's courage began to overwhelm James completely. Here was a child who had faced challenges that most adults couldn't handle, who had lost his parents, who lived without sound, yet still found the strength to show respect and gratitude to others. The boy's bravery put James's own struggles into perspective and reminded him of what true courage looked like. Tommy held up his small notebook, showing his grandmother the drawing he wanted to give to the guard. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she saw the careful detail her grandson had put into the picture. The precise uniform, the proud stance, the kind eyes. At the bottom he had written, "For keeping us safe," in his best handwriting. James felt his resolve crumbling completely. Every instinct, every emotion, every human impulse was telling him that rules and protocols mattered far less than responding to this child's incredible gesture of respect and gratitude. The boy's silent courage was calling out to something deeper than military training. It was calling out to his humanity. The moment stretched on, tension building as everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. James's breathing deepened, his grip on his rifle loosened slightly, and his eyes never left Tommy's face. The internal battle between duty and humanity was reaching its conclusion, and humanity was winning decisively. Tommy held his drawing against the railing, hoping somehow the guard would be able to see it. His grandmother translated his signs, whispering, "He wants to give you his picture. He's been working on it all morning. He thinks you're a real hero." Though James couldn't hear her words from his distance, he could see the boy's earnest desire to share something precious. Then, in a moment that would be talked about for years to come, James made a decision that shocked everyone, including himself. The boy's courage, respect, and pure heart had touched something so deep inside him that he could no longer remain motionless. Tommy's gesture deserved more than a returned salute. It deserved recognition from one human being to another. With movements that felt both terrifying and completely natural, James secured his rifle and took his first step away from his post. The crowd gasped in disbelief. Royal Guards simply didn't abandon their positions. They didn't walk away from their duty. They didn't break the most fundamental rule of their service. But James was no longer thinking like a guard. He was responding like a human being whose heart had been completely captured by a brave little boy's respect and kindness. Each step toward the railing felt like crossing into unknown territory. But James had never been more certain of anything in his life. Tommy's courage demanded courage in return, and sometimes the most important rules are the ones written on the human heart rather than in military manuals. The distance between the guard post and the railing was only 20 feet, but those 20 steps would bridge two worlds and create a moment that neither James nor Tommy would ever forget. As James walked toward the railing, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Tourists stopped mid-sentence. Tour guides paused their explanations, and even the pigeons seemed to sense the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a guard breaking protocol. This was a moment when humanity triumphed over rules, when connection mattered more than regulations. Tommy's eyes widened with disbelief and joy as he realized the guard was walking toward him. His small hands pressed against the iron railing, and his face lit up with the kind of pure happiness that only children can express. He looked up at his grandmother with excitement, signing rapidly to tell her that his hero was coming to see him. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she watched the uniformed soldier approach her grandson. She had no idea what was happening or what it might mean, but she could see the genuine kindness in James's eyes as he drew closer. This wasn't a man who meant any harm. This was someone who had been deeply moved by her grandson's gesture and was responding from his heart. When James reached the railing, he knelt down to Tommy's eye level, bringing himself into the boy's world rather than forcing the child to look up at him. The gesture was so natural and respectful that it immediately put both Tommy and his grandmother at ease. Here was a soldier who understood that true strength sometimes meant making yourself smaller, not bigger. Tommy's breath caught in his throat as he found himself face to face with his hero. The guard's eyes were kind and warm, completely different from the stern, distant expression he wore while on duty. Up close, Tommy could see that James was younger than he had appeared from a distance, and there was something gentle about his smile that made the boy feel completely safe. James looked into Tommy's eyes and felt his heart break and heal at the same time. The child's face showed such pure joy and gratitude that it was almost overwhelming. Without thinking, James reached out and gently touched the boy's small hand where it gripped the railing. The simple human contact bridged the gap between their two very different worlds. The crowd watched in amazed silence as the interaction unfolded. Many people were quietly crying, moved by the beauty of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a photo opportunity or a tourist attraction. This was two human beings connecting on the deepest level, sharing a moment of mutual respect and understanding that transcended all barriers. Tommy carefully held up his drawing, offering it to James with both hands in the way his grandmother had taught him to give gifts. His eyes sparkled with hope that his hero would accept his small offering. The picture showed remarkable detail for an 8-year-old's work. Every button on the uniform, every fold in the fabric, every element that showed how carefully Tommy had been observing. James accepted the drawing with the same reverence he might show to a Medal of Honor. He studied every line, every carefully written word, and felt tears welling up in his eyes. No commendation from his superiors had ever meant as much as this simple picture from a brave little boy who understood the value of service and sacrifice. "Thank you," James whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with genuine gratitude. Though Tommy couldn't hear the words, he could read the emotion on James's face and knew his gift had been received with joy. The boy's smile grew even brighter, if that was possible, and he began signing excitedly to his grandmother. Sarah translated Tommy's rapid gestures. "He's saying you're the bravest person he's ever met. He wants to know if you like his picture. He hopes it makes you happy when you're standing guard." Her own voice was thick with emotion as she conveyed her grandson's innocent, heartfelt message. James felt completely undone by the child's words. Here was someone calling him brave when Tommy was the one who had shown real courage. The boy had reached across barriers of communication and social convention to express his respect and gratitude. Tommy had taught James something about bravery that no military training could provide. Standing up slowly, James realized that he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Tommy's gift, his respect, his innocent appreciation, had reminded James why his service mattered. It wasn't about following rules or maintaining traditions. It was about being worthy of the trust and admiration of good people like this remarkable little boy. But as James looked back toward his post, reality began to set in. He had abandoned his position, broken fundamental protocols, and acted in a way that would certainly have consequences. His superior officers would not understand or appreciate what had just happened, regardless of how beautiful and meaningful it had been to everyone who witnessed it. The moment of pure human connection was about to collide with the harsh realities of military discipline and duty. As James walked back to his post carrying Tommy's precious drawing, he could see his commanding officer approaching with quick, determined steps. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's face was stern and unreadable, exactly what James expected from someone who had just witnessed a complete breach of protocol. The weight of potential consequences settled on James's shoulders, but strangely, he felt no regret for what he had done. Tommy watched from the railing as his hero returned to his position, unaware of the trouble that might follow. In his innocent understanding, what had just happened was perfect and beautiful. A soldier had shown kindness to a little boy, and that's exactly how the world should work. He waved goodbye with both hands, his face still glowing with happiness from their encounter. The crowd began to disperse slowly, many people wiping away tears and talking quietly about what they had witnessed. Several tourists approached Sarah to tell her how moved they were by her grandson's gesture and the guard's response. Tommy became an instant hero to the other children present, who looked at him with new respect and admiration. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison reached James's position just as the guard resumed his formal stance. "Officer Mitchell," he said in a low, controlled voice that only James could hear, "report to my office immediately after your shift ends. We need to discuss what just occurred here." The tone suggested that this conversation would not be pleasant. James nodded slightly, accepting whatever punishment might come. As he stood at attention, Tommy's drawing carefully tucked inside his uniform jacket, he reflected on the choice he had made. 6 years of perfect service record might be tarnished, his career prospects might be damaged, but he had done something that felt more important than following rules. He had honored courage and innocence when they called out to him. Tommy remained at the railing with his grandmother for another hour, watching James with continued admiration. Sarah explained through sign language that they would need to leave soon, but Tommy was reluctant to go. He had found his hero, shared a perfect moment, and wanted to stay in that magical feeling forever. Every few minutes he would wave at James, hoping for another acknowledgement. When Tommy's visit finally ended, he pressed his face against the car window as they drove away, keeping James in sight until the last possible moment. Sarah promised him they would return someday, and Tommy began planning immediately what he would draw for the guard next time. The encounter had sparked something in the boy's heart that would influence him for years to come. 3 hours later, James stood in Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's office, still holding Tommy's drawing. He had expected anger, disappointment, and formal discipline. Instead, he found his commanding officer holding a printed email and wearing an expression that was difficult to read. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Harrison finally spoke. "Officer Mitchell, do you know what this email is?" Harrison asked, turning his computer screen toward James. "It's from the Palace press office. Apparently, your interaction with that young boy was photographed by several tourists and has already been shared thousands of times on social media. They're calling it the most beautiful moment of human kindness they've ever seen at the Palace." James felt confused and uncertain. Was this good news or bad news? Had his breach of protocol created a public relations problem, or had it somehow been received positively? He remained silent, waiting for his superior to continue and explain what this meant for his future. Harrison walked around his desk and stood directly in front of James. "That boy's grandmother contacted the Palace this afternoon. She wanted us to know that her grandson has been through tremendous hardship, lost his parents, deals with deafness, struggles with feeling different from other children. She said your acknowledgement of his respect gave him more confidence and joy than anything has in years." The commanding officer paused, seeming to struggle with his own emotions. "Officer Mitchell, in 25 years of military service, I have never seen a more perfect example of what it truly means to serve others. You recognized courage when you saw it, and you honored it appropriately. Yes, you broke protocol, but you upheld something more important. You showed that honor and respect deserve recognition, regardless of rules." James felt overwhelmed as he realized he wasn't being punished but praised. Harrison continued, "The royal family has been informed of the incident. Rather than disciplinary action, they've requested that you receive a commendation for demonstrating the highest values of service and putting human dignity and courage above rigid adherence to regulations when the situation called for judgment and heart." 6 months later, James received a letter with a return address he recognized, Tommy's grandmother's house. Inside was another drawing, this one showing 2 figures saluting each other with "Friends Forever" written across the top. Tommy had also included a school report he had written about heroes, featuring James as his primary example of what true courage looks like. The letter from Sarah explained that Tommy had been inspired by James's kindness to join a youth program, helping other children with disabilities. The boy's confidence had grown tremendously since their encounter, and he often told people about the day a real hero took time to acknowledge his respect and accept his gift. James carefully placed the new drawing next to Tommy's first picture, both now framed and hanging in his quarters. Every day before duty, he looked at them and remembered that sometimes the most important moments happen when we choose humanity over protocol, when we respond to courage with courage, and when we remember that true service means honoring the good in others, especially when they need it most. The story of the Royal Guard and the deaf boy became legend among the palace staff and visitors, a reminder that the greatest acts of service often happen not in grand gestures, but in simple moments when one human being chooses to see and honor the courage in another. Tommy's silent salute had created ripples that would inspire kindness and understanding for years to come, proving that respect and love truly are universal languages that require no words to change lives forever.